Welcome everybody to the latest Keele Business Gateway webinar. Today we're joined by Staffordshire County Council Chief Executive John Henderson to answer your questions around the Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic challenges and opportunities for the county and its businesses. With John today we have my colleague Annette Shipley, plus obviously myself, David Lowe, and we are both entrepreneurs in residence here at Keele. There are two ways for you to get involved today. The first is to submit a question down the right-hand side of the screen, so my left. And the second is to submit an anonymous question via the email. You do that by scrolling down to the bottom of the screen and then entering the question there, and that will be the email to the host. I'll be watching the web chat and I'll be monitoring the emails and then feeding those in appropriately as we go. And I'll hand over shortly to Annette to start our discussion. When we finish today, the conversation will continue online using the hashtag Keele Talks Business. So that's on Twitter, and we're using the same hashtag on LinkedIn. John, can I ask you to introduce yourself and give us a quick overview?
Yeah, and thanks so much, first of all, for the invitation to speak to you today. It's been a it's really valuable experience for me to get some feedback from you as well as anything else. Well, my name is John Henderson. I'm the Chief Executive of Staffordshire County Council. Strangely enough, last week I celebrated my 5th anniversary in this job, which makes it the longest job I've ever done, almost by a factor of 2. Because prior to this, I was in the army for 33 years, and I never did a job for more than just short of 3 years. And my background there was engineering and logistics. I finished as the British General in Germany, where I had the sad task of closing down all our various garrisons, etc. And then I decided to have a change of career, and I've come into local government. It's been a really interesting experience, and I think it's something that this last 2 months has been hugely helpful for me. The experience I've got in terms of background of both sectors. And I think it's be a really fascinating conversation today with you, if you to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, thank you, John. That's great to have you here, and I think people are really excited to hear about what you have to say and to just share some of those experiences that you have at the council currently. I just want to start off with a kind of very general question. You're very involved with the MSIL programme that we have at Keele, and we're really grateful for that because it's a fantastic addition to the programme. And having been at Sandhurst, which you have shared with us in the past, how do you feel that experience at Sandhurst has prepared you for what we're dealing with now in terms of leadership?
I think that the whole thing around leadership, and it's something that I reflected on, after a couple of years or 3 years in this job, was that the armed forces are really fortunate to have a system of effectively they select people, they train and educate them, and then they give them the experience, and they select them again. And it's almost like a spiral going upwards. And really, there's no other organisation in the country that can afford to do that kind of commitment to training and development. And I was immensely fortunate. I mean, I was at Sandhurst is the officer training school, and I did that sort of in the mid 80s, and then but since then I've worked out that I spent probably the best part of 5 years in full-time or part-time education or training, mostly around leadership and management. So what effectively, and then you put into that all the various jobs I've done, I probably had an incredibly privileged experience in terms of that sort of development. And it's not something that I think that many people outside the armed forces will get. And so when I speak to my colleagues here, I find that they've had to do all of this in their spare time. They do it themselves. They take it very seriously, but they haven't had anything like the opportunities I've had.
Yeah, I think so. And something that you've said to me in the past, which has always struck a real chord with me, and that is, and I'm going to quote you here, John, so you can tell me I'm misquoting you if you like, but something like that responsibility is a unique concept, that you may share it with others, but your portion cannot be diminished. And I think that's a lovely quote. How relevant do you think that concept has been during this crisis, and how much do you draw on that?
It's absolutely true. And actually, funny enough, for those interested, it's a really interesting, quirky guy called Admiral Hyman Rickover. And Hyman Rickover was the first Jewish man to become an admiral in the US Navy. He also, from his work point of view, he was a significant engineer. He introduced nuclear propulsion for the US Navy, and it is notable that the US Navy has never had a nuclear accident, predominantly because of this care and attention that he did as he introduced it in the 40s and the 50s into training and organising and the technical aspects around it. But Hyman Rickover had a real thought about this thing about responsibility, and I would expand on that if I may. It's responsibility, absolutely key. You've got to have some person, one person you can say, who's responsible for this? Who is the one person who takes responsibility for this? But actually, you also need to align accountability and authority as well as responsibility. And I think that's, my experience is where you get those aligned, generally speaking, things work. Where things aren't aligned, generally speaking, they don't. And by accountability, just to be clear, so that we all, because we're all, we all get different views and different meanings from different words. Accountability for me is those not just money. Money is important, obviously it is, but there'll be assurance and governance aspects that you've got to be accountable for. Who are you accountable to? Might not be the same person you're responsible to. So you may be, take children's services in a county council. I am responsible to the cabinet and to the leader of the cabinet, the leader of the council. But I'm accountable in children's services to the Department of Education, because they are the people who come and inspect us through Ofsted and the various other agencies. Same with accountable to the Care and Quality Commission on Adult Social Care, and we'll probably end up talking a bit about that because that's been the focus very much of this last 2 months. But then also, absolutely crucial is authority. And it is the authority to make changes. It's the authority to actually make decisions and apply them. Because there is absolutely nothing worse than having a responsibility and accountability, but no authority. Because you're effectively tying someone's hand behind the back saying, I'm holding you responsible, you're accountable for this, but you can't do anything about it. And that's absolutely crucial, that you must align those three. And we've seen some good examples of that in the last couple of months, but we've also seen some pretty poor examples. Personally, just up front, I think the government's strategy around the isolation and the lockdown, etc., have been spot on. There have been aspects of the operationalisation of it which have been less so, and I think they would accept that. And there has been slightly a tendency towards over-centralisation in London, and we've been certainly pushing back on that from the County Council, but in a positive way. What we're effectively saying to them is, look, we know you're busy. It's really important you get the lockdown right, and it's really important that you get the recovery right. Let us help you, delegate to us, make us responsible. We'll be accountable to you, but just give us the authority to get on with things. So that's that whole line where you're realignment. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's really what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying on the same vein of how you work with your people, I mean, providing good services, as good services as possible in the conditions that we're dealing with, to clients and customers, of course, translates directly into looking after your staff.
Yes.
So this isn't COVID specific because it's brought it into sharp focus. How you work with your people, and it's an even greater challenge to do that. So providing leadership and support to staff who themselves are facing intense pressure and dealing with the uncertainties that exist. What does that demand of you and of your people as leaders, and generally as us as leaders? What's the difference? Is there a difference?
I think there is, and actually it's hard in an isolated solution, whereas you might have gone and had a face-to-face with someone and just said, look, it's okay. He said, you can't do that now. You've actually got to do it virtually or do it, whatever it is. That's harder. I had to adapt the way I do business. But about 4 years ago, we started on a programme of smart working within Staffordshire County Council. And my logic behind that was very much that when I came into this organisation, what I saw were enormous parallels with the armed forces in terms of the commitment to public service. That public service ethos is exactly the same. That level of commitment that people make in their time and their energy and all the rest of it is exactly the same. And I think also that whole business around their humility and the way they look at things, absolutely the same. Got it all. What's different? Actually, local government officers are a lot better with money than soldiers because the money's real. If we overspend, if we save, then we overspend. If I save $1 million on something, that $1 million is still there to then be spent on something else that benefits the residents of Staffordshire. And that's different to the armed forces, because because of the way that budgeting works in the armed forces, it tends to be the money. If you save some money, it goes down a hole in the middle, back to the treasury. You never see it. So that actually engenders some quite bad behaviours in places. The other thing that's different is that the armed forces instill a certain. It comes back to that thing about Sandhurst you mentioned, and all the way through. They instill a level of confidence in leaders and in people, and the reason they do that, it's not for any other reason than this, is that they understand that on a really bad day, when you can't get in touch with your boss, you're going to have to make a decision and stand by it. And that's why the armed forces do all the training they do in terms of leadership. We don't do that in local government. So what I want to do when I started the Smart Working was to raise the level of confidence and agility within the organisation. And that was really because I knew that we were going into the second half of austerity. We absolutely had to make savings, etc. when I got here in 2015. And we absolutely had to get through this. There was potential of rising demand, etc. And in order to achieve that, I needed to have colleagues who were confident in their own abilities, and could make the difficult decisions with the agility that we needed to do. So I think that kind of gets to that whole thing around agility, confidence, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I think you've got a question here, haven't you?
Yeah, we've been looking at the emails that are coming in and trying to sort of put them together as a bit of a theme to put a question in. So this week is Mental Health Awareness Week. And over the last few months, the detrimental impact of the coronavirus pandemic and the detrimental effect that it's been having on people's lives has been quite widely discussed. So clearly, as a leader, it's an emotionally tense environment, and promoting psychological safety must be at the top of any leader's list. So, John, what have you been able to do with respect to this in the current climate?
I think it's a really valid point, and actually, I'll maybe expand a little bit on how the armed forces deal with it and the things I've learned here. But to start with, I think it comes back to that leadership thing. You have to gain the confidence of your people. You've got to actually stand with them and say, you make a decision, I stand with you. I take responsibility for this responsibility. And that's the key point, is that, some people who don't understand the armed forces think that it's all about giving an order to someone and give you a power kick. It doesn't at all. Actually, when you do that, when you're under command of someone or receiving orders, it's a bit of a bargain. You strike with the person. And that bargain is, you do what I tell you, I take responsibility for what you're doing. I'll stand beside you and say, no, he did the right thing, she did the right thing, because I told them to do that. And I think that's really important. On the mental health thing, you're absolutely right. And we've got we are working really hard on that. I'm watching physically. We have a daily personnel dashboard, which we've started since the start, which effectively looks at absence, looks at health factors. I watch that like a hawk. I read it every morning without fail, just to see where are we. And it's actually been flat and slightly declining in terms of numbers going off sick. And that includes people who are self-isolating around COVID, etc. So at the moment, we're holding firm. That's not where we expected to be. We did have a worst case scenario when we started this, which suggested that about now, we would be suffering about 25%, not casualties, but 25% absence. We're nothing like that. We're something less than 10%. So actually, things are really quite good. And that includes all the long-term absences, etc. But I'm not complacent, absolutely not complacent. One of the things that the armed forces do that's really good, that I would just sort of highlight, is when you're on an operational tour, they have a thing they call decompression. And what that means is when you're coming back from the operational tour, you get some briefings before you leave. And the briefings are, look, this is what you've been through. This is probably how you're feeling. This is how this is going to affect your families when you get home. But also, not only that, it's a bit about, this is how your families have dealt with it, being back at home. Now, that's different here because we're living at home. And that's a fundamental difference that about this operation compared with previous operations I've been on, is that actually I'm the same person in the same office doing the same job with the same colleagues. That's not the normality. But I think the decompression thing is something I've just been flagging up to my colleagues, saying at the end of all this, we're going to have to do something that helps people to decompress a little bit to get back to whatever this new normal. People talk about the new normal. I think we really need to think about that new normal and work out what that means. But I think that's one of the big lessons I'm taking away from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my experiences, John, as a FTSE 200 main board director was actually, how do I look after myself? Because if I can't look after myself, how do I then retain that enabling of my organisation? So how do you manage your own health and well-being? Because that's equally important. You need to stay fit, healthy, etc. And finding ways to manage that stress while you're looking ahead and you're helping others and you're dealing with the day-to-day. That's a huge task.
It is.
Do you have any advice for us?
Well, I may be one of the few people in the COVID emergency who's lost weight. And part of that is the rate that I'm working at, but also part of that is the fact that, I've got a cross trainer at home and I've been on it virtually an hour a day since the start of this. And I find staying fit really helps me, physically fit really helps me mentally, because my brain works better. I'm feeling probably a little bit more refreshed. I'm sleeping better from that point of view, because there is no doubt you can really, really struggle. And that's the point, you're absolutely right, Annette, is that and it sounds a bit twee to put it this way, but I think one of the measures of your effectiveness as a leader is how willing your colleagues and subordinates are to share their problems with you. And I used to have an expression, I worked for a general once who used to shout at everyone if things went wrong. And I have a joke with someone, I say, how you deal with the first piece of bad news you get will dictate when you hear the second one. Because if you shout at everyone, then people will not come to you with the bad news. But if you say, right, so what's the solution? And so regardless of how angry or stressed you are when you get that piece of news, you've absolutely got to hold the line and say, so what's your solution? And then hopefully you get into the culture of the organisation that people come to you with solutions. So they come to you before the wheels come off. Because if they come when the wheels are really come off and things are going horribly wrong, there's probably nothing you can do as a boss. But sometimes, if they come to you before it all goes horribly pear-shaped, you can maybe pick up the phone, or you might be able to do something, or you might be able to just say, right, let's tell you what, let's just do this. And the reality is, if they come to you with a solution, it's, and I always used to joke to say, go to someone with a solution and you'll get the answer you want. If you go with a problem, you're probably not going to get the answer you want. So I do think it's really important keeping your own mental health, but also creating that culture where you continue to be approachable.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. It's one of those important qualities, isn't it, John, as a leader? So just staying on the same thoughts of how leaders respond during COVID, given that in routine emergencies, traditionally, many leaders tend to kind of rely back onto command and control, which is, I think, what you're advocating is actually that's not necessary. I mean, you do sometimes have to dip into that, but when you're dealing with high-level solutions, that's usually very, it's not the best way to go. So, however, in a crisis, I think it does demand something different. And I believe, from my experience, to relinquish that top-down response will engender stability much more quickly. What's your experience of that, and how have you drawn on that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think command and control, and it's interesting that, and it's not, I'm not having a go at you guys, but every civilian talks about command and control as being a negative thing. Actually, as a military, command and control are two different things, two entirely different things. Command is actually freedom. If you get command of an organisation, the idea is you've been given the authority, back to that responsibility, accountability and authority. You've been given the authority to make decisions and do things within the limits of the mission you've been given. Control are the limits of that mission. So control measures, so command is freedom. But I get what you mean. What you're actually talking about in many ways is micromanagement, is that business of not trusting people, that low levels of trust. And I think that it's something you've just got to work on, because if you can, you build a level of trust with people over time. They come in and there's a certain assumption of their level of competence and capability. Yeah. But what you must do is give them that freedom as best you can. Now, there will be times when you can't give complete freedom to people. And that absolutely, if you have a good enough trusting relationship with your subordinates and with your colleagues, you can explain to them why it is, in this instance, you need to just slightly more closely manage this, slightly micromanage it. And I try to say to colleagues, look, this is really sensitive. Normally, I would let you run straight through this, but this time, once you've done that, come back and have a chat. We'll see how we're going, and then we'll do this, and then we'll come back, and so it goes on. And I think but that requires a level of trust so that you can say, let's make it a conversation as opposed to top down.
Yes,
because ultimately, if you're trying to do the person at the bottom's work, you're probably not doing your own.
Yeah, that's really, really, really true. So in the same vein, as part of the MSIL programme at Keele, we work with Staffordshire-based SMEs to develop them and how to respond better and stronger to innovation and change. So, change management is actually at the centre of what we're going through now. At the highest level, you've just said it yourself, at the very highest level, we can't make decisions quickly enough to be able to respond to some of the things that are happening. How do you work with your people and your teams and your team, but teams underneath them? How do you do that to enable them to respond and feel empowered to discover and implement those solutions so that you aren't micromanaging?
Well, and it's really interesting you say that, because actually we've probably cut out large amounts of our processes that we had beforehand. And you take adult social care, which has been the focus, because this is an awful disease that unfairly targets the most vulnerable in our society: the frail, the elderly, those with underlying conditions, etc., etc. And so therefore we've had the problem in the care homes, we've had the problem with home care, and that's been a feature of this particular disease. It seems to just exploit a weakness, a physical weakness that somebody has, and absolutely goes for them. And so that's been something we've really worked on. And because of that, what we've done is we've stripped out a lot of the processes. Now, we've tried to keep the assurance and to make sure that we are doing the right thing, so that accountability, but giving people that responsibility and the confidence to say, we're going to make this difference. And I think that's what's been really an interesting aspect of this, is how do we get the decision action cycle, because this is what we're talking about. Yeah. This is the observe, orientate, decision, action. And we all do this. People think it's a military thing, but I was slightly joking, say, you have a decision action cycle when you cross the road. You get to the edge, you look around, is it clear? Am I going to do this? You observe, you orientate yourself based on the traffic. You make a decision, act. As you go across the road, you keep looking around to see how quickly the traffic is. So we do it in our normal lives. All the military have done is formalised it. But it's a really good thing. And I think what we've done is we've speeded up our decision action cycle in a way that actually is really good. And that comes back to that thing about the new normal. A lot of my colleagues are saying to me, do you know what, John? Let's not go back to the old ways of doing business. Let's take this. So there's an awful lot, although this has been an absolutely awful experience for many, many people, there's actually a lot of good that's potentially coming out of it. And I think that's quite exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So during this time, I mean, we've heard some wonderful stories that what communities have been doing, community groups, voluntary sector, just your neighbours. There's been some fantastic stories. Do you have any stories about your own staff that warm your heart, that makes you feel hopeful for the future, that what you're saying, actually, we can make it different?
I think, I'll pick up on your initial point, and then I've got one we want to talk about. So the first part is, you're absolutely right. And the thing that struck me more than anything else in Staffordshire, and it's funny, if I've asked, basically it's an observation I've made, and I've shared it with lots of people on various, Teams meetings, etc. And so said, look, is this your finding as well? And it pretty much is. And that is that in this response, it has been these small, hyper-local groups and communities that have done the really heavy lifting. We've delivered in excess of 2,000 food packages, so it's a 1 week ration packs to various vulnerable people. But we haven't delivered them. We bought the food, we've assembled them, we've done all this, the various pieces, and we've got the staff, the dinner, ladies and gentlemen, out of the schools. They put it together. It's on the news last night. But they've been delivered predominantly by community groups. Yeah. And these are community groups who've sprung up all over the place, and they've done a superb job. But the one example I was going to just say was one of the things that we've really laid into in Staffordshire has been the personal protective equipment, PPE. I'm probably one of the few people for whom PPE actually meant personal protective equipment, but prior to this thing, because that's what we used to talk about. Biological and chemical, you wore your PPE. But the reality is that, we made our first order for this on the 10th of March. So 2 weeks before the lockdown happened. And that was because my health and safety manager came to me and she said, do you know what? I think PPE is going to be an issue on this. And I think we need to get ahead of this and make some purchases. So that's exactly what we did. We're about to issue our 1 millionth piece of PPE today, 2 months later. No care home in Staffordshire has gone without PPE because we've set up from scratch a supply chain whereby we have we've bought in large amounts, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of things, like nitrile gloves, like surgical masks, the plastic aprons and things like that. Those are the three big things we use in social care. And they've been absolutely super. A group of colleagues who volunteered to change roles, they've stepped into this. They are doing deliveries. We use 8 of Staffordshire's fire stations as effectively our distribution network. So effectively we've got a distribution hub in the centre. We've then got 8, but we've also got emergency supplies. So if a care provider sort of raises a critical thing and says, look, we've run out today, or the delivery we were promised hasn't arrived, we can actually just put some in a van, take it round to them and do that. The upshot of that is that the care workers in Staffordshire's care homes and wider in the home care work, the workforce has been far more resilient and robust than we could ever have dared hope. And I hope that part of that is down to the fact that they feel supported in terms of PPE, because PPE has become the key enabler in this operation for people doing their jobs.
Brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. I think just as totally related to that is I think what you're saying is also about how you effectively build network teams and new teams to respond to crisis as well. And that's critical because they're, like you just said, they're adaptable, they're responsive to change, they're expanding, they're willing to take on new things. Soliciting ideas, I guess, isn't enough. Asking people what your opinion isn't enough, is it? So have you been able to engage and build those teams that fosters that collaboration, brings that transparency across the council? That's something else. Have you been, how has what you've just explained there allowed you to build those effective teams?
It has, and it's a certain amount of just allowing things to happen and guiding them. And I think the PPE team, for example, I gave the top level thing of saying, right, absolutely, we need to get into this. I happen to have been the logistics director for 3 years. It was actually, that is the longest. That's the previously longest job I've ever done. But prior to that, I commanded a logistic brigade, and part of that was a tour in Afghanistan where I was responsible for what they called the surface line of communication, which was effectively the ships and the lorries, etc., going through basically across the sea, in at Karachi, up through on trucks into Afghanistan and beyond into the forward post that the soldiers were manning. That was part of it. The air bridge was another part. Prior to that, I think a number of years before that, I commanded my battalion in Iraq. I learned an awful lot about making a resilient supply chain, and it was disappointing, if I'm being really honest, to hear some people who really didn't know what they're talking about just-in-time logistics. When what they actually meant was we didn't have enough of it and it wasn't getting there. Just-in-time logistics requires a significant investment in time, effort, and money. It is not something you just do off the top of your hat. People like Toyota and Derby have spent years getting it right. And of course, it helps if you're in a factory which makes the same number of cars today as it did yesterday and as it will tomorrow. Then you can actually get just in time and you don't have to have stocks. Where you have uncertain supply and uneven demand, you need stock. And so we've been building stock over a number of weeks. People have, and these teams have formed up, in answer to your question, people have become expert in this whole business. They understand the PPE business around the country, and they've been able to buy at reasonable price. And I'll give you a little example, if I may, is because we've got some stock, it actually saves us money. Although we've spent about £1.5 million so far on PPE, it's a significant sum of money, it's been worth it because of that robust resilience that we've got in the workforce. I'll give you a little example. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to the manager who's running it, and she told me, she said, well, we're looking to buy several 100,000 aprons, the plastic disposable aprons. If we'd wanted them for the next Monday, so 6 days hence, we'd have had to pay £72,000. But because we could wait another week because we had stock, they were going to cost us £28,000.
Wow.
So we literally are saving money by doing it that way. Now, I've empowered her and her team to get on and just do that. They don't have to come to me and say, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that. And actually, that they feel so confident, and they know they're doing a good job. But they also know when they've got to really turn to, and they've been working 7 days a week, so dropping off material on Sundays and all the rest of it. So it's been an interesting dynamic where and local government officers we're not naturally an extrovert sort of organisation. We're kind of introverts. That's the sort of people they are. I'm probably the exception because I'm an ex-soldier. But they're being introduced to a different way of working.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. David, have you got something that's come in from a listener?
Yes, I've got an email question here, John. It's around the theme of returning to work after people have been told to stay at home. So obviously people have complied with the government's request. People have stayed at home for quite a considerable period of time. And the questioner asks about getting people back to work at the right time. And the question is concerned around people's attitudes towards their tolerance, if you like, of taking risks because people seem scared. So how are we going to get people who can and should be at work to transition from the stay at home and then come back to work?
That is a really good question, because actually that gets to the nub of this. And it comes back to that. Remember I talked about that relationship when you go under command of someone, you do as you're told and you've got response. If you like, the British people have been under command of the Prime Minister for the last 8 weeks. He told us to stay at home, we stayed at home. He's now basically saying, use your common sense. Go out when you need to. But be reasonable. And actually, some people find that really hard because they're saying, well, the threat's still there. And that's really hard. So how do we get people from that place where they're saying, gosh, I'm doing as I'm told, I'm staying home, I'm protecting the NHS, I'm saving lives, to stay alert? Well, what's that mean? And actually, I absolutely get it. And this is the point that we're trying to do in Staffordshire. It's something that the politicians and we had a discussion about it a couple of weeks ago. And you'll have noticed over the weekend, there were a number of campaigns for people saying, don't go to the seaside, don't go to national parks, don't do this. We actually took a slightly different view in Staffordshire. And that was, let's treat our residents with respect and trust in their common sense. Because, frankly, I'm a Staffordshire resident, and I'm not sure that I like the idea that I take the first view. I'm a bit of an idiot, and I need to be told what to do all the time. So actually, let's treat people as if, they were us. Imagine you were receiving that message. So take, for example, last week, we opened our household waste recycling centres and our country parks. Small starts, small steps. But we deliberately did not put in any onerous booking systems, or some places have odd and even number plates. So basically, if you had a 63 plate, you went on a Monday or a Wednesday or a Friday. If you had a 64, you went on a Tuesday, a Thursday, or a Saturday. And there was things about not having forward booking and the checking addresses and all this stuff. We didn't do any of that. We just said, look, folks, you've all been at home for the last 8 weeks, and you've been doing all those long overdue jobs in your garden. So you've probably got a lot of rubbish hanging about. But you know what? These places have been closed. So don't all rush at once. Come in a steady rate. And that's exactly what Staffordshire residents have done. And when I was just catching up this morning, we've had about 13,500 people visit our household waste sites in the last 4 days. Now, there's been queues, but it's been manageable. And we've actually got through it quite well. And it's exactly the same with our country parks. People have gone to country parks. They've acted responsibly and with common sense, and they've had a bit of time away from home. That's brilliant. That's exactly how we should be doing it. Now, answer to your question, absolutely. Schools are going to be really difficult. And so part of this comes round, and we're dealing with internally. Funny enough, I've just come off my senior leadership team this morning, and we've had a really interesting discussion about how we're going to make this building, Staffordshire Place 1, compliant for social distancing. Because at the moment, there's about 150 people. The house is about 1,400. So we've effectively gone around and we've tried to make it into, we have a place which will house probably 300 to 400 people, but with social distancing in place. And that comes down to that creating confidence amongst our workforce, that we are looking after you. You will be safe when you come to work. We need to do exactly the same with our schools. And we're having some really good conversations with schools about how can we help you. And so, for example, back to PPE, one of the things we're offering is we're going to give small packs of PPE available to every school, to every early years provider, every FE college. Now, they shouldn't need it because they're not dealing like adult social care people. But the fact that they've got it in stock might just give them the confidence to say, do you know what, it's okay. The kids can come back to school. It's going to be fine. So it's that sort of thing about creating confidence and consensus in the population for whatever it is you're wanting to reopen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks,
And
John.
just on that vein, John, I think it's related to that. How have you been able to balance deliberate calm with that bounded enthusiasm, that combination of what you said there, giving people confidence, but actually acting appropriately to get things moving? How do you, amongst all of the activity and all the things that you have to hold in your head that you've got to do, how have you been able to do that? And how have you been able to make decisions, pause to assess and anticipate and act, all of those things that you do as a leader all at the same time? How have you done that?
Well, it's been really interesting. And again, forgive me if this sounds a little immodest, but having commanded 4 times an operation, it's something I really worked on hard in the military, was not to get swept along with the running around with your hair on fire, because I haven't just got enough hair to go around and have it on fire. So
well, you've been doing it a lot.
So I try to, what I've always tried to do is have a calm, sort of attitude within your headquarters, within your planning staff, so that they actually are not trying to solve today's problem, they're actually trying to solve tomorrow's problem. And the more you can do that, you create some intellectual headroom in the organisation. And if you can create intellectual headroom, you're thinking ahead. And that was one of the reasons, keep coming back to PPE, because it is the issue there. The very fact that we are not running around saying, I need another box of masks, I need another this, we've got it, because we've got a great big stock of it. Not great big, we've got a stock of it. We can actually use it. And it's going out as quickly as it's coming in. But what it means is we can think ahead and say, what does this look like in a month's time? What does this look like in 3 months' time? And then we can do things like we're doing with the schools, with businesses, etc., and actually getting people to think calmly ahead. Because I remember, once in Afghanistan, I had a Royal Marines officer, a very senior officer, came in to visit, and he said, this headquarters is really calm. And I said, yeah. He says, but everyone's working, so that's really good. And it was probably the greatest compliment I've ever had in terms of actually, here you are. Because most headquarters, military headquarters, there's a lot of energy. Everyone likes a good crisis because they can run around, they can not do the boring stuff, they can actually get on. The reality of life is what we're doing is often about creating the conditions for the future. And that can be quite boring. But what you need to do is somehow persuade your people that actually that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you. So just looking, we've got a couple of things. I know that David's wants to come in with a question in 1 second. But just looking a little to the future, you've talked before about, the importance of the community in responding to COVID. And how are you working with the voluntary sector? Despite the efforts of central and local government to mitigate the impact of what's happening economically, those organisations are really struggling for the traditional sources of funding, but yet they're really key to some of the solutions that we're talking about here. Whilst the voluntary sector is struggling for those sources of funding, what as a council have you been able to do, or are you thinking about in terms of supporting that sector?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because actually the microgroups, generally speaking, are true voluntary. They don't require any funding. But how do we embolden them going forward to continue to operate in the way that they have been? Because actually that's really exciting. We have actually been funding some chosen organisations. There's an organisation, umbrella organisation for the voluntary group called Support Staffordshire. And that is a group of professionals who know the voluntary sector inside out. They've been exceptional. And when they came to us at the start, they said, look, we've lost our income streams, we can't do this. We actually did make some money available to them to keep them going. So we have done that sort of thing. It's really important to I think going forward, we're going to have to think really carefully about which part of the voluntary sector do we actually want to support? Because the bits that have done well, Staffordshire, have been the really small groups, and they've been exceptional. And in the past, they haven't necessarily attracted our attention or our funding. And I wonder whether that's the way in the future that we actually want to go. So it's a bit of a work in progress, but I do think that it's part of that new normal. I don't think our support to the voluntary sector will be the same in a year's time, 2 years' time, to what it was a year ago.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. Thank you. David, you've got a question on planning for recovery.
Yes, thanks, Annette. John, last week we had the news of the extension to the furlough scheme. We also had the Employment Income Support Scheme opened, and I think that was opened early, if I've got that right. But on Friday, we also had the dreadful news concerning significant redundancy consultations at JCB. Could you give us a sense of the support initiatives that we've got in Staffordshire? And if you're able to, could you give us a flavour of what's perhaps been looked at by the council in terms of planning for recovery from the crisis and stimulating the local economy?
David, that's a huge bringing it up. I think it's probably the most important. And the key part to this is there's a number of parts, but I think that unusually for one of these operations, normally you have bang, you have a response, flood, fire, whatever it is, and then you go from response, stop, close down response, you get into recovery. We're going to be in response to this till the year's end at least, and probably a bit beyond. But we can't wait till then to start the recovery. So we've already started our recovery planning and our recovery action, not just planning, but actually action. And the first thing I'd sort of make is that, and again, come back to that thing about the central government. I actually think the central government strategy has been really good because, it was interesting. I don't know if you caught a couple of weeks ago, the chief executive of Pret a Manger was on, and he was talking about reopening some of his outlets in London. And they asked him about the thing. And I think the journalist was rather hoping that he would have a real dig at the government. And actually what the chap said was, do you know what? We're a multinational company. I see the totality of business support around the world. And I can tell you, the British have pretty much got it right. He said we've got a really good suite of things to do to actually keep businesses going. He says, you can pick and choose cherries from different countries and say, oh, look, they're doing this and they're doing that. But actually, he said, in totality, we're doing really well. Yeah. So I think the furlough scheme is really good. There's a number of issues with it. How do we get out of the furlough scheme back to normality? And part of that's going to be, I think that's why there's that whole transitioning thing that the Chancellor's sort of working with. I think that's really clever.
Yeah.
But there is also the fact that in reality, and it comes back to that thing I talked about, let's not return to the old ways of doing business that I'm seeing in my organisation, is that some companies, even if they survive, will look considerably different to what they look now. So some people who are furloughed probably will not go back to the jobs they did, or may not go back to any job at all, even if the company survives. And I think that's something we need to be ready for. And there's a certain amount about skills and what does the new economy look like? Are there any things that we should be doing? And I would in the past as a county council, a lot of our thinking around projects and programs would be roads, railways, physical infrastructure. So here we are 2 months later. We're on a Teams meeting. We'd have normally done this. I'd have driven up the M6 to Keele. I'd have come into your studio. We'd have done this face to face. And here we are doing it over the internet. So question, do we need to widen roads? Do we need to build new roads, new railways? Or do you invest in digital infrastructure? And just before we went into this, for example, we submitted with Stoke-on-Trent, with the universities, including yourselves, and with various business groups in the LEP, a 5G and fibre broadband proposal to central government. That's beginning to feel really prescient. That feels like something that we should be investing in going forward, because that will open up different jobs, but those different jobs will need different skills. And so what we've done, and certainly as well as all the suite of various things that the government have done, and the district and borough council have been absolutely super at getting the money out to them. They've been really assiduous and done very well. One of the practical things we did, there was a gap, and that was a gap for micro businesses, businesses with less than 9 employees. And we did a small scheme, which was literally up to £1,000 of a grant, just to keep them going. And we had a limit of 500 on that, £500,000. That was pretty much sold out within a few days.
Wow.
And so we're now looking again to say, okay, so what next? What would be the next thing we should do? What's the next gap that we should fill as a local organisation? So, because ultimately, and I remember, I'm going to slightly adapt, General Sir, who's now Lord Richards, David Richards, during the financial crash, there were lots of people saying, we need more money for defence, we need this, we need that. And David Richards used to say, the biggest threat to British defence is the British economy not recovering from this crash. And I think that we're absolutely in the same place now. The biggest threat to Staffordshire County Council is Staffordshire's economy not recovering. And so we have a responsibility for getting that right and making Staffordshire's economy recover. And we're absolutely, bursting every gut we can to do that.
Thanks, John. I'm conscious that was quite a wide range of a question, but thanks for the the response that really did meet that. Annette, do you have any follow-up questions?
I think it's a really interesting debate, and I hope we don't lose it, because actually when we have a crisis and we feel like we want the world to be different, we want things to be different, it's so easy to go back to what you know. Hopefully, I mean, one of the advantages we've got here is the time period has been extended, a couple of months, for it to become part of how we do things now. Maybe we have a chance because it's not been 5 minutes, it's been a few months. And I think that, redefining and defining what is this new normal, because we talk about new normal, but nobody really, we haven't yet shaped what that might be. Is, what does that new normal look like? What should it look like? And how does it impact on people? And I think that is a really critical point for me, is because we have this opportunity. We talk about wanting to do it different. Well, we've got the opportunity to do that. So how John, how would you make that start? I
think you're right. And it's interesting. I was, when you were just saying that, I was just reminded that my wife is a cancer survivor. And I remember asking when I first met her, I said, so did it change your life? When she said, yeah, for about 2 weeks. And I think that's most cancer survivors will tell you that for about 2 weeks they wake up and go, God, every day is going to be, I'm going to celebrate every day. And after about 2 weeks they go, yeah, well, I'm still here. And I think that's what we need to do is as we get out of this, is remind ourselves that we actually do want to make things different. There are things that we're going to change, because I do think there's an opportunity going forward. And how we do that, I think, is keep reminding ourselves of what we've achieved and where we're going. Because, every time you have major disruption, that is the best time to do major change. And I'll give you a sort of hyper, international version. That is the United Nations. Absolutely everyone agrees the United Nations needs significant reform. Absolutely everyone agrees that it's not the right shape, it hasn't the right people and all the rest of it. But we'll never get them to the thing, because no one can agree on what the new shape should be. And the United Nations was formed in the white heat of the aftermath of the Second World War, when things were really disrupted, the whole world was in a bit of chaos, and someone says, right, we're going to put together this organisation which looks like this. And it looked absolutely spot on in 1945 through to 50, etc. They're going to struggle to get any form of reform because things aren't bad enough. Now, so what we need to do is, in this instance, is locally and nationally, is say, okay, so things have been bad, and this is what we're going to do differently going forward. And, I'll give you an example in education. If a year ago, someone had said, we're going to have a digital online school, and we're going to recruit the top 40 teachers in Britain to teach at this school, you'd have just had howls of, oh, you can't do that, you can't do this, oh, it's terrible, it's this, that, the other. Well, it's up and running. The Oak National Academy is up and running. It's got 40 teachers drawn from across the country, and they're teaching online lessons. And I noticed there's a number of others sprung up as well. The BBC has started one. So you now have, if you're a parent, an option about how you school your children, because there is absolutely a viable online option for doing homeschooling in a way that there wasn't 2 or 3 months ago. And the same will be true of universities. The same will be true of colleges. And actually, this is the thing as we're talking about as the council. We've now held full cabinet meetings and scrutiny committees and all that stuff online. And do you know what? We're getting quite good at it. In fact, the council leader, the first time he did it, he complained, "Oh, this is never going to work." Now he prefers online meetings because the text box down the side allows people to make comments, raise their hands, do all these things. He can actually manage an online meeting probably more effectively than he can a physical meeting. Now, there are limitations, of course there are, but actually in certain circumstances, that is a potential benefit. And then, of course, there's the reduction in travel time, coming back to that thing about what's important to us. Road usage, vehicle usage, climate change. There's all sorts of opportunities there.
Absolutely. I have a question. I just want to ask it because it's obviously quite a heartfelt question. So we've got Yvette Hansbury-Robinson has asked a question about, there's so much conflicting information, and that's one of the challenges, isn't it? We are bombarded with information. There's so much conflicting information about reopening educational establishments that it's become surrounded with fear. How would you advise parents, leaders, to ensure that this new normal is carried out by their staff with confidence?
And it comes back, I think I mentioned earlier, but I'll just repeat it and we develop on it a little bit, is this morning when I was in the ops room, Tim Moss, who leads for us on education, he's been holding various conversations with schools, with the trade unions, etc., the teachers' unions, etc., saying, okay, so what's your concerns? How can we address them? And actually, we've now got to the point where I think, when we finished on Friday afternoon, the teachers' unions, who are the ones who, quite reasonably are saying, is this safe? Should we be doing this? Are actually saying, you know what, you've pretty much done everything, with the possible exception here of, we're not sure we agree with the national PPE guidelines. Well, if that's the case, question mark, do we do anything local? So, because it's about, there's no point in forcing parents to send their children back to school, because they won't. They're not going to order their children back to school if they don't believe it's safe. And what we need to do is convince them that actually it is the best thing for them. And actually, there was a thing this morning, I don't know if you caught on Radio 4, but one of the problems is that you've got affluent children are getting about 30% more education than children from deprived backgrounds. That's the assumption is that I think they say that the children from affluent backgrounds are doing about 6 hours a day. Children from more deprived backgrounds are doing about 4 hours a day. Well, that we will just, if we don't address that, we're going to end up with an attainment gap, which is even worse than it has been in the past. And I think we absolutely need to get that back. So, but it's incumbent on people like me and the people that work for me to create the conditions whereby people say, no, it's absolutely the right thing to do, and we're going to do it. And actually, I have a particular thing around this because, although I'm a sort of middle-aged, balding man, this is a predominantly female organisation. We are 77% female in Staffordshire County Council because we've got a lot of social workers, we've got people, the traditional professions that we employ tend to be more favoured by women. The average age is 48. 80% of us live in Staffordshire. Now, that means for me, my average colleague is a working mother with care responsibilities probably at both ends. She's probably got kids, and she's probably got elderly relatives who live locally. And therefore, what I need to do to get her to be an effective colleague and be, and get her back to work and be as efficient as she possibly can, is I need to help her in that way. So things like the smart working that we did, that was absolutely aimed at that colleague. And equally, getting the schools open again and getting a safe business where elderly people can actually go out and do things. That's absolutely good, because that's that's something that is directly affecting my colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. To finish up on a positive note of where we see the future, something that one of our listeners here, Kirsty Rowlands, has just said, and I think it's really interesting, is that she's saying, looking at all the work that universities have done across the country in response to COVID-19, here at Keele have done so much and been doing so many fantastic things, that you've got Keele nursing students and staff supporting on the front line, got Keele pharmacists making hand sanitizers. We've had businesses who've been involved in the MSIL program, changing from, for example, one of the gin companies has changed from, producing gin to producing hand sanitizers. People have been really innovative around this time. And students are on internships and supporting charities, and then got the Cobra Biologics base at the Science Park working to find a vaccine. It's just so heartwarming. It just gives you it gives me real hope for the future, and that critical importance of universities and authorities like yourselves coming together and working together to define this stuff that we've been talking about today. So, on that note, in terms of the future and all the really great stuff that's happened, what's your message, John? What would you, if you could say, I want it to be like this, what would your message be?
I think it's, again, it's about, my leader always talks about the fact that in Chinese, the character for crisis and opportunity are the same. And although it has been an absolutely awful experience, and we have had some pretty awful days that we're going to have to deal with going forward, because we're going to look back on this and say, yeah, I did go through that. That's right. And but I do think that there's an opportunity for us as an organ, as a place. And it is interesting that I think that Staffordshire, and I'll speak for just for Staffordshire and Stoke, we are regarded nationally as being a place that has got it together on this. And it's interesting that we meet our MPs once a week, which we never normally do, but we have a Teams meeting with them now once a week. And they are enormously positive about what we as a place are doing and the things that we are achieving. And when I sort of was complaining a bit about the fact that things were being over-centralised in London, what I got back from them was, yeah, but not everywhere Staffordshire. And I think that's not just the council or the councils, including Stoke City. I think it's also the universities, the hospitals, the whole way that private sector have come together and done things, as you talk about changing roles, people really stepping in. And I think that's, we mustn't forget that, because we've learned an awful lot and we've achieved an awful lot. And it comes back to a little reflection on my military time, is that when you come back from an operational tour, and it's been really stressful, there is a period thereafter that the unit absolutely hums, because everyone's got a shared experience and everyone has been through something together and they have bonded. And I think we've bonded as a place, and we have a story to tell that I think is really positive. And I think that now, unlike the military, where people started getting posted out immediately and disappeared, and within a year that had gone, because that bond had gone, we're probably all going to still be here in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, in various roles or similar roles, and possibly the same roles. And therefore, let's use that bond, that common purpose going forward for the benefit of ourselves, but also our neighbours and our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic message. So thank you, John. You're a delight as always. It's always a fantastic opportunity to hear your thoughts and just to talk to you. So thank you so much for sharing and being so candid. It really is a delight. David, can I just hand over to you? You've got a few things to say, haven't you? Oh, we can't hear you. There we go.
Sorry about that, guys. Sorry. Just say thanks again, John, from myself and Annette. John Henderson, Chief Executive, Staffordshire County Council. And thanks to the Hickson Group for hosting the platform. And a big thank you to our audience today for your questions and interactions. You've been absolutely brilliant. We couldn't get to all of your questions. That's becoming a bit sort of almost every time, but we do our very best, and we do try and blend them and mix them in to get the best flavour for our guests. We are going to continue the conversation online, so we're going to continue on Twitter and we're going to continue on LinkedIn using the hashtag Keele Talks Business. And looking forward, we've got 3 upcoming webinars later this month. So we've got 20th of May, we're going to be exploring the topic of funding for business. On the 28th of May, we've got the marketing conundrum, how do businesses communicate after COVID-19? I'll attend that one, I think, to make sure I leave my mute button on. And to finish today, I'd like to encourage everybody who hasn't already done so to sign up for the Keele Gateway mailing list. This can be done via the Keele Gateway site or via an email that we're going to send to all the participants today on a link. So you'll receive that link shortly. So yeah, thanks everybody and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks now. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.